Good morning and welcome to the Eclectic Radical. As always, I'm Chris Richards, the Eclectic Radical. With me today are my co-host, Bess Goden, and our guest, Connor Exum, the host and author of Leon Trotsky's Revolutionary Substack and podcast. Connor, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Chris. Thanks. It's great to be on with you and Bess today. I guess we're going to talk about borders and whack job patriots that want to control borders
Yeah,
themselves.
yeah. Well, I saw the article you were sharing with me the other day about volunteer militias doing, Nazi stuff on the border again. And this has been going on at least for all of my life. And I know that the Texas Rangers started out as a Nazi militia on the border, so not just my life.
Well, yeah, it's a long-standing tradition with most borders in most countries. You get these small groups that decide that they're going to control how the border really works in their local region. And it just happens that I found this article in Daily Kos that was, I thought, kind of bizarre in the sense that it had this police officer, this ex-police officer that they were using to infiltrate these groups. And he kept on writing stuff like, well, they're 60 to 70% of them aren't really bad. And then you got to ask yourself, what does that really mean? 60 to 70% aren't bad. If you join a group that says, I want to control our border and I'm willing to go out and shoot people to do it, I'm pretty sure that makes you a bad guy, not a good guy.
Well, so
Yeah.
that's a good topic. If I'm interested in Bess's thoughts first, but I have some knowledge on that from talking to people who protest. So I'm putting a pin in that. Bess, what are your thoughts?
Oh, I didn't mean to. You could totally go first if you want to. I was just 100 saying what he was saying. Go ahead, take it away. I'm trying to share the stream.
Fair enough. So as it happens, and my stream of thought is gone. That's hilarious. But no, this whole, as it happens, the cops frequently side with these Nazi groups. One of the scandals that I will never forget here in Portland was that our police chief was separated from her job. I say separated from her job because the question of whether she resigned or was fired is still very open in my mind. It was one of those very ambiguous things. But we had a lot of protests against ICE here in Portland, even before the George Floyd stuff happened. And when the George Floyd stuff happened, the Black Lives Matter stuff and the ICE stuff kept going together jointly in support of one another. And one of the things that came out about it was that cops who were policing these anti-ICE protests were texting with Patriot Prayer and cooperating with them and sharing information and calling them friendlies.
Right. There's definitely that overlap. You see it all the time. I mean, what was it? Just like 2 weeks ago, they had that congressional sheriff's group, and a good percentage of the people that were there were actually January 6th convicted felons who were then there promoting themselves as being righteous
law and order
patriots. Yeah, law and order.
Oh my God.
And on top of that, you get ridiculous stuff. The state of Oklahoma is passing into state law the very stuff that got Sheriff Joe Arpaio sent to federal prison.
Right. Well, so's Iowa.
Yes.
Iowa's the first to make it legal for the sheriff or any legal police institution to just
arrest you and fingerprint you if you don't present a valid ID on command
and deport you.
So that's literally papers. That's literally like house without papers.
That's right.
Well, yes, no, somebody else actually called it. May I see your papers movement?
Yeah, literally. Holy shit.
it makes me think of all these World War II or Cold War spy movies where the guy with the obviously German accent, who's either supposed to be a Nazi or an East German KGB guy, says, "May I see your papers?
Do you have your papers, please?"
Yeah,
Your papers in order." And but this is where these laws take us, to the bad guy in the Cold War or World War II spy movie asking us if our paper's in order, but with an American accent because he's an American cop.
Mm-hmm.
my question is that so we're going down this route, but what happens when you're already a citizen and you don't have your papers? Where do they deport me to?
Well, so here's the thing: they don't necessarily the Oklahoma law is arrest and fingerprint. So that means you don't have your ID when you're supposed to present your ID. They arrest you, they lock you up, they fingerprint you. Now, without something else to charge you for, they still have their rules, 24, 48 hours, whatever it is, before they have to let you go.
Oh, sure.
Or get some specific court order giving them permission to hold you longer or whatever. But with all that in mind, this is an excuse to fingerprint you and get your prints in the system so that if your prints ever show up, you're the guy who failed to present ID when asked on such and such, and now you're in the system and the cops know who you are and can find you in the future.
Oh, yeah.
It's also a good way to get bail money. If you want to get out before the 48 hours or whatever, you're going to have to pay some kind of fee to get out. And, that's going to keep poor people off the streets.
Well, now here's the whole thing. That first 24 to 48 hours before they charge you with anything, there's no bail at that point. That 24 to 48 hours is the time that the cops can just sit on you, and
true.
You can talk to your lawyer, and that's about it.
But they have charged you with something. You haven't shown your papers.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. That's what they're charging you with, not showing your papers.
But no, that's not. But that's not. So the way this law is written, that by itself is not a prosecute you charge.
Oh.
That is a lock you up and fingerprint you charge.
Okay, so
now that said, like I said, your fingerprints ever show up in connection to anything else, then you're suddenly that guy who didn't show the cops his ID when asked on such and such a date at such and such a time. And now you go from person of interest to suspect really quickly in the cop's mind.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I like to see who this is really going to affect. I mean, I think we all know it's going to be the poor underclass.
Well, so the excuse for people presenting valid ID is always, we want to make sure that these people are legal citizens who are supposed to be in our great state.
Right. And all of the illegals that have been doing our shit work for ever.
Now let's keep that in mind. I mean, Oklahoma and Iowa, don't get me wrong, these are agriculture states, right?
Yeah.
Well,
and Oklahoma has chicken plants, if I remember Tyson scandals correctly.
I think Oklahoma's also still rather large in the oil industry, where they're starting.
Well, yes, Oklahoma does have an oil industry. Oklahoma also has a very successful casino and tourism industry now.
I thought it was where the waving wheat something in the plains.
No. So the amber waves of grain is Kansas.
Oh, I was quoting the song Oklahoma.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. That's a good.
I think they lied in that song.
Well, no, there's all sorts of things in Oklahoma.
I've been to Oklahoma. It's flat and empty.
It's flat with hills.
Yeah, the guys who wrote that lived in New York. Like, let's all remember that. They lived.
Well, hey, it's like, it's like in addition to Oklahoma, you've got in Calamity Jane, the Take Me Back to the Black Hills of, those people have never been to the Dakotas.
That's true. I just thought it was funny that when I was in Oklahoma, there's a big oil rig outside of Oklahoma City's main court, the courthouse that says Texaco on it, and you just know that they're never getting a ruling that's not good for them.
Yeah. Yep.
But no, Oklahoma's got a little of everything: ranching, oil, corn, little bit of wheat, tourism, casinos.
So I got a question, not to change the subject, from Oklahoma's beautiful tourist attractions, but what is exactly the legality of militias? I'm aware that it's sort of, that it's a part of the Second Amendment. I am not aware of how that sort of plays into, practical law.
So this is a really good question, because I'm not a lawyer, and it would be, so I can't give you the lawyer's answer.
Okay, great show. Have a nice day.
What I can do is I can say that it's not really clear from everything I've been able to see or read exactly how that constitutional language about militias would apply today under today's U.S. law. The purist, the person who believes in the liberal state as it exists today, would tell you that the state National Guard fulfills the role of the state militia as it has traditionally and officially been mustered in the past.
Interesting. Because doesn't it authorize informal militias? I mean, so my question is, because it's not, yes, we've got militias down at the border, but we also need to acknowledge that we have militias, in and amongst our population. We have militias that, are enforcing white supremacy. And they came out in droves during the BLM protests. And that was actually one of my arguments about the Kyle Rittenhouse case.
I wish we had more of a socialist, anarchist, communist militia, since we're speaking about it. But all that aside, so you're asking what the status of militia law is, and I am saying that it really depends on who you ask, because different lawyers will give you different legal theories based on ideology.
Because there's been no practical cases.
So historically, there was the state militia, and the state militia, under the old way of doing things before the Civil War, was a real organization with official ranks and officers, and every male between the age of 16 and 60 was a member, and all these other details. And the local officials could call up local battalions for local emergencies, and the governor could call up the militia to put down unrest or to stop New Jersey from invading New York, or whatever might come up. These are the theories. New Jersey never actually invaded New York, but that was one of the theories behind the state militia, that New Jersey might invade New York, and New York might need to defend itself.
Is that really what?
Potentially. Well, you have to understand that things like this did happen in the colonial history we don't really talk about. The second settlement in the area of settlement sold to the Plymouth Company of Massachusetts, as opposed to the Massachusetts Bay Company, was actually attacked and destroyed by the militia of the Plymouth colony. And there were a series of religious excuses used. These people were silly pagan Satanists who had whose governor put up a maypole, and that clearly made them witches.
Of course.
But all that excuse aside, what it came down to was Plymouth didn't want another colony cutting into their action, and so they burned them out.
Wow.
But so that's the sort of thing a militia is for, so that Marymount can stop Plymouth from burning them out. Or if Plymouth has a better militia than Marymount, so Plymouth can burn Marymount out. Because remember, that was a legal militia.
Right. A legal militia, and how like who sanctions these things, right?
Well, at the time, it was sanctioned by the Plymouth Company, who were the people who had paid for the colony. Now, this is
God, capitalism.
fun part about American history is that the Pilgrims were religious fanatics who had taken money from capitalists and promised to give them a profit.
Yes, totally.
And so the took their money and promised to give them a profit meant that technically for the first few years of its history, the Plymouth colony was owned by the Plymouth Company. And the Plymouth Company was the official body that sanctioned the militia. In fact, Miles Standish was an employee of the I hate it when I can't talk, was an employee of the Plymouth Company. He was employed by the Plymouth Company as a military advisor.
His name was Miles Standish?
Yes, Miles Standish.
Wait, can we just take a second and appreciate like that's like a contradictory name? Standish at the same time, but up. Okay, go ahead.
Well, as a fun fact, Miles actually means soldier in Latin. Oh. So the military advisor and chief military guy to the Pilgrims was a guy whose name was actually soldier.
Oh. A soldier who stands and doesn't fight. Very nice.
Well, he did quite a lot of fighting. He led the attack on Marymount. He did quite a bit of fighting against indigenous peoples. As it turns out, that whole celebrating Thanksgiving together did not mean that there wasn't the traditional colonial settler attack against indigenous people to kill them and steal their land. That did happen despite that wonderful Thanksgiving tradition we have today.
Well, now he's standing-ish in hell then.
There's probably true, though. Another fun fact about Miles Standish that he was not a Puritan originally. He hired on as a professional soldier, but that he became a appropriately orthodox practicing Puritan because it was politically good for him as the military boss of the colony.
Wow. That warms my heart.
Miles Standish is most famous, sadly, these days because of Henry Wadsworth Longfellow and stories about John and Priscilla Alden and Miles being in love with Priscilla and asking John to court her for him, and John getting Priscilla all hot and bothered and then saying, "Hey, you really should meet my friend Miles." And then Priscilla's like, "Dang it, John, I want you. Speak for yourself."
Aw.
But that heartwarming story is a little bit of propaganda that conceals the fact that he was a thug for capital.
Mm. Aren't all heartwarming stories really though? No. So my question is, let's fast forward a little bit, right? When were the amendments written? The
10 amendments are your the first 10 amendments that talk about your right. The Second Amendment talking about right to keep and bear arms and the need for a well-ordered militia.
Right.
That's when the Constitution was written. Those first 10 go with the Constitution to guarantee its passing as part of the whole deal.
Gotcha.
Because the founding fathers had a thing. This guy, John Dickinson. I recommend the musical 1776, by the way, for a better understanding of John Dickinson.
No, you can't. You can't do that to me because I've already seen it more than once, and I do not remember any of it.
This guy, John Dickinson, refused to sign the Declaration of Independence.
I believe
he was such a curmudgeon.
That shit out.
He was such a curmudgeon that he refused to sign the Declaration of Independence, and he made a big speech about why he wouldn't do it.
Oh, yeah.
And he was one of Delaware's representatives for the Constitutional Convention. Okay. And while there are all sorts of other stories about it, the simple fact is that all you have to know, you have to believe in your heart that all the other delegates to the Constitutional Convention is like, he wouldn't sign the last time. Nobody's signing this one until he signs it.
Wow.
And so this is why the compromise under which our congressional and senatorial and electoral college numbers are chosen is called the Dickinson Plan.
Okay, all right.
But that was the compromise, because there was the Roger Sherman plan, which would have given everybody a single vote in Congress, the way the way the Senate works, but with only one senator, and that would have been the Congress, one vote per state. And then there was the what was it called? Sorry, the Randolph Plan by John Randolph of Virginia, which would give every state votes in Congress based on population. Of course, now Virginia was the biggest state, and Roger Sherman was from Connecticut, which was one of the smaller states. So you see their biases in this. If you think of it as the states are still independent countries whose different cultures and politics might make for significant differences, you see why the big states wanted to go by population and the little states wanted to go by one vote per state.
Yeah, interesting.
And so the Dickinson Plan is a compromise that gave us the Senate, in which every state got 2 votes, and a Congress in which every state got votes based on population, with the idea that the House of Representatives represents us, the people, and the Senate represents the states.
Mm-hmm.
Which then brings up the question, what is a state, and why does it deserve representation, and why does it have borders, and why does it need militias to defend those borders?
So I'm interested in the wording of the Second Amendment. And you write that it does say a well-ordered militia as opposed to a state-sanctioned militia, which I think
it's an interesting difference, isn't it?
It is, and I think that it leaves a lot of room, which is troublesome.
You okay, Connor?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, we don't mean to dominate the convo. If you want to pop in, please.
No, I will.
Okay.
I was looking for a picture.
I got weird because I thought I saw an expression on his face, and then I got weird. So never mind. Sorry, everybody.
Oh, okay. So my point was this, because this was the sort of circumstances around the Kyle Rittenhouse thing, the murder, I'm going to call it. So he was part of a militia that was called together online, like one day after, because this was during a several day protest. So the protest started, and then I believe the second day they started organizing this militia. They called online for people to come across state lines, bring arms across state lines, which is legal. It was picked up, I think, by Fox News. I think it was picked up by Alex Jones, who wasn't yet disgraced at the time. And
I mean, he's always been disgraced, but I know what you mean.
He disgraces himself, but basically, it was sort of called, and then this message was sent to the police department of Kenosha, which was essentially like a statement from whoever was leading this militia. And it basically said, we have 3,000 people that have RSVP'd to this Facebook invitation. We were physically going to outnumber you, police, like speaking directly to the police. So you probably don't want to get in our way, and you probably want to help us. I mean, that I can't remember the exact wording of that message, but that was essentially the message that was sent to the police.
And remember, the police were like all over cooperating with Rittenhouse and people like him at those Kenosha protests.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's 2 reasons for that, but one of them is that they were directly threatened beforehand.
So I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that's might be an excuse, but that generally speaking, those sorts of groups and the cops are aligned in their views.
No, absolutely. That was
There's if you remember the Ahmaud Arbery trial,
Mm-hmm.
where those folks were fortunately convicted, but their defense was a citizen's arrest law that was on the books, and is on the books in many states, not just Georgia, but a citizen's arrest law that was on the books to essentially allow any white person who could pick up a gun to police any black person they ran into. And this was based on the idea that in a state like Georgia or South Carolina, where before the Great Migration away from the South and into the North, black people outnumbered white people. The theory was that every white man was a deputy, sworn to enforce the law against those dangerous and uncontrollable savages. This was the thinking behind law in the South, this kind of racism.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And the thinking behind the beginning of police, right?
Yes. But even more than police, this was the idea that, so the cops were the official people, but every white person around was the unofficial support for the cops. This is where you get the posse in all these Westerns.
Mm-hmm. So what does it say now that racism has blossomed so beautifully that we can go look the police dead in the fucking face and say, you better watch out and get our backs because we're going to enforce our white supremacy. Like that's beyond fathoming to me. And I also think that that's something that we really need to talk about. Like,
so my question is why can't anybody opposed to fascism manage to do that?
Because look at who has the guns and money now.
Yes.
That's the problem. I mean, if the people who are opposed to fascism get guns and money, there will be a revolution. That's not a question. We don't have that, though.
Guns, money, and lawyers.
Warren
Yeah.
Zevon.
But no, that's what we need right now, guns, money, and lawyers.
Yep.
Did you see the image I sent? I think that is really pertinent.
Let's pull that up.
Can we... Oh, why does it go sideways?
Rotate it?
I should be able to give it a rotation in a moment or two. Let me...
because I think that's... You know...
Connor may have to rotate it. He's the one sharing from his screen. I might not be able to rotate
on my screen. It's normal.
Okay, that's interesting.
Remove from edit. Remove from stage.
This man is your friend. He fights for freedom.
Right.
Whose freedom?
Well, that's a good
And
question.
This is not only a picture of Kyle Rittenhouse, but this is a picture of Kyle Rittenhouse in the exact getup that he was.
Well, this looks like a picture from one of the various videos that people have shown that were taken during those events.
Absolutely.
So this is Kyle Rittenhouse somewhere in the process of the act.
Absolutely.
Oh, completely. But I mean, it's all over the internet, this kind of imagery. It's in places you don't expect. You know, I mean,
that's true. You showed me the snowplow forum.
Right. I found this one on a forum called Ford Power Stroke, right? It's supposed to be about diesel engines, right? And modifying a car. But they had a whole section when he became a problem that is just meme after meme of stuff like this.
You remember when car websites just had porn for the spam content and not all this stuff?
Yeah.
Porn is so much healthier than this.
No, that used to be that was one of the big things on the internet when it was young. Girls, guns, and cars.
Right.
Yeah.
Girls with guns or cars.
Beautiful, big old titties and put a gun on them. That's all you need. You don't need to shoot the gun.
It's advanced a little from those
humble
beginnings.
Disarm the Nazis, arm the sex workers.
This is just all over the place. You find this all in the deep dark recesses of places where it's not traditionally thought of as being like a conservative, militia orientated
but
venue, but it's there.
but
And these are the guys that are creating the content that's
but
driving these websites.
and I say but, having lived in the South, there is a confluence between truck culture
Oh,
and gun culture
there is.
and Nazi culture.
Oh, it all goes together.
And so it doesn't shock me that Nazi content would end up in these very specific, generally masculine sort of sounding forums, because hey, Nazis are always trying to corner the market on macho and tough.
Well, that's definitely true, and that's right here.
Yep.
And to think that Kyle Rittenhouse is the sort of person that we would show up as a standard for tough and macho, when he's a guy who ran away and shot back in panic.
Literally, he did things that no expert gun user would tell you to do.
And one thing that I do want to say and I have to phrase this carefully, but one of the lessons that you take away from what happened here is that Kyle Rittenhouse shot first, killed and wounded people, and it is much harder to return fire effectively when you're wounded.
And the people he was shooting at didn't all have guns.
Well, no, but there was one person who did, and his claim was that because of the way they hacked the video together, his claim was that the other people shot first, which isn't true. The other person shot after he was already wounded, which is where I say it again. When you are defending yourself and others, it is much harder to aim effectively if you're already wounded. Please remember that.
Yeah. And let's also talk about how well regulated this militia was, because this kid was too young. This kid was too young to be doing any of this. He didn't have training for any of this. The most training he had was some kind of like police youth buddy program that he went through in high school. And I think he'd been 17 when it happened and then turned 18 during the trial. I'm not sure. But it's
not so well regulated. Comes down to, well, did they do what they were told to do while they were told to do it by the people in charge of the militia? Since we don't know who was actually in charge of that militia, we don't know the answer.
That's true. So let me tell you a couple of details that I found out from the Kyle Rittenhouse trial, if you'll indulge me,
Sure.
Because they do talk at length about what happened that day, who knew who, and who was, how they found out about it and what they did. So essentially, these people were all coming together in little cells, right? I mean, nobody knew each other beforehand, but everyone was just sort of showing up and then making little groups. And they were sort of, just choosing a building or a block or an area to sort of patrol and protect. And so they, like him and a friend of his, and I think maybe one or two other people they were friends with, all decided to help, defend this one building. And then at some point, the building was being, like, people were throwing bricks at the building or something like that. And at some point, they left the building, not necessarily in fear, but to go get, like, the brick throwers. And then they just started patrolling the sidewalks, because everyone at this point was later in the evening, and they were all congregating in gas stations and in larger areas. So that's when they sort of went rogue. So one could even argue that yes, absolutely, armed right-wing gangs, absolutely.
And you could argue that they built the country, but that's a whole nother discussion.
Oh, that too. But no, one could argue that if the term well-regulated militia, it means that they are well regulated to the point where there is a chain of command, that they obey the chain of command, and they're all communicating with each other as to what they're doing. The facts leading up to before he committed the murder, none of that could be even construed as well regulated, because it certainly wasn't. There was no clear leader. There was no clear action plan. Everybody was just kind of doing what they felt like doing. Of course it was like that. Right. So, I definitely think that there's a constitutional argument to be made in that case. And I don't mean to get us away from what's going on at the border, too, because this is, again,
this all feeds together, though. All of this, the websites, the border, Kyle Rittenhouse,
it's
the people,
dudes.
The people who are going down to the border with AK-47s are the same people who were going to these protests with AR-15s.
Absolutely. These are people who are, heavy into the gun world and have connections, socially through different interests, right? And then they go and they see a cause that they think or told is worth fighting.
I want to bring up the word super owner, because one of the things that doesn't get talked about enough when people talk about guns on TV or in print media, unless it's really specific and arcane print media that most people don't read, is that despite the huge number of guns per people in America, the actual owners of those guns are a relatively small group. What they call super owners, who own at least like 5 or more guns.
Damn, I'm one.
Well, I mean, I'm not saying everybody who's a super owner falls into the same category, and it's good that we have at least one on our side. But what I'm saying is that, anybody who owns at least 5 guns falls into this super owner category. The super owner category overwhelmingly includes people of better economic status who are of comfortable and secure social class, and who could very well be hiring people to participate in such organizations with their guns.
100. Absolutely. I mean, and even if they're not hiring people, they're absolutely acting as right.
And I make this joke because he outed himself. Obviously, Connor, I know it's not you.
I just wanted to bring up that's what Kyle Rittenhouse said. He had a gun that was purchased for him by somebody else.
Yes.
Too young to do it himself. So you're right, yeah.
That whole chain of custody with the gun was strange. I mean, the friend's father bought it for him. It was going to stay in the house.
Right? Yeah, I've got a safe in the basement, but it wasn't locked on the day. Yeah, it was very, very dodgy.
I mean, the truth is, he did what they call a ghost purchase. He was able to purchase it legally, and he gave it to the kid and said, if anything happens, I'm going to just say that you stole it.
Yeah,
it's a gifting. Yeah, it's that aftermarket gifting where the purchase is completely legal in all the ways it's supposed to be, but then it immediately goes into someone else's hands in an untraceable manner as a gift.
Yes.
Well, technically, it's not really a gift because you can only do that with like close immediate family and have it still legal, right?
Oh, I didn't say that it was still legal at this point. I mean, if it leaves someone's hands untraceable and you're not declaring it and shifting ownership and registration and such, then it's still a crime. But it disappears, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. I mean, that's our big problem with these kind of guns. That they are
because
so many.
You have this gun that legally is in Aunt Jane's closet, locked in a safe in case anybody breaks into the house, but it's actually being used by Nazi goon number 5 on terrorist operations for the Michigan militia.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. I mean, so getting back to the militias, I mean, if we really go through the law, it doesn't appear that any of them are legal. If you and I just come up one day and say, "Hey, I'm forming a militia."
Now this is of course another way that people would look at it. This is all illegal. These people are just putting terrorist groups together.
I mean, except for I think like 2 states have laws where you can make it legal that way, and it's like Michigan and of all places Idaho. And that's why you see all these groups like Moulin Labe is based out of Idaho. All these right-wing Christian nationalists that move up there to play, end of days world war games with themselves. They're all in Idaho.
These laws are why these laws are the reason for the Eastern Oregon secession movement that wants to join Idaho. There are a lot of white supremacists in Eastern Oregon who want their organizations to be legal if they join Idaho.
Wow.
And they're also the same people that are moving down to Arizona and forming these groups right on the border. And they're creating all of our problems with these really radicalized guys that are usually former ex-military who've been either cashiered out for any number of reasons that aren't so hot,
let's not change the fact that somebody who I've had on various shows in the past and hope to have on again someday in the future is Brooke Binkowski, who was most recently editor-in-chief of trutherfiction.com, which sadly failed to compete with Snopes despite being much better and having all the best writers from Snopes. And despite Brooke Binkowski having been the former editor-in-chief of Snopes back when it was good. But no, they just couldn't get the advertising and money to stay going long enough to become successful. It's weird that all these terrible internet companies can pull all this money together, but good ones can't.
Wait, so who you started off that sentence about?
But she used to be a journalist on the border and do a lot of talk about border policing, border militias, the border patrol. And the first thing you have to remember is that there's a Nazi culture in ICE and the border patrol in the first place.
Yes.
It's been there at least since the 1990s, arguably longer, but at least since the 1990s. And that ICE's mission was changed by the Patriot Act and the Homeland Security Act and things like this from being what was formerly the Immigration and Naturalization Service to being Immigration Criminal Enforcement. Now, think about that for a moment, because the name is a mission statement. And Immigration and Naturalization Service says that whatever problems your organization may have, your organization's official stated mission is to bring immigrants into the country and make them American.
Yeah.
Now, you compare that to Immigration Criminal Enforcement, where your job is to find the criminals trying to sneak into the country and bust them, which is an automatic surrender to the right-wing assumption that criminals are trying to sneak into the country.
Yep.
And this happened after 9/11 because we were so scared that some Saudis on diplomatic passports had attended flight school. Now, let me point out that nothing in the Homeland Security Act or the Patriot Act would actually prevent Saudi nationals with diplomatic passports from going to flight schools again. What it would do is make it easier for them to trace. What it does do is make it easier for them to trace us organizing against the government.
Of course it does.
Now, at the same time, you see the Border Patrol and ICE embrace these militia groups with the same sort of they're our friends attitude that cops show towards neo-Nazis. And they say they're not all bad because they do not believe that just being a Nazi and using paramilitary force to assist the official authorities in doing violence against marginalized people is a bad thing. You have to do something really atrocious for a lot of these people in law enforcement or border security to call you bad.
Like JT Reddy shooting his whole family.
Like the dangerous man they wanted to lock up for 20 years for putting water in places where people crossing the border could find it.
Well, that's true, but that's how JT Reddy became a bad guy, is that he shot up his family, right? And then, then it was, well, he's bad. We can't do. But the other 60 or 70% in the group, they were okay.
Those bad apples, man.
Well, it's like but you have to remember that you have to remember who the federal law enforcement establishment is, and understand that during the monitoring of the Branch Davidians, there was always a pro Branch Davidian faction of federal law enforcement arguing against busting them because they really weren't bad guys.
Yeah, there was a lot of interesting things about the Branch Davidians.
It's like the big thing. The number one reason for scandals about Waco and Ruby Ridge was because of leaks made by federal law enforcement people who sympathized with the so-called victims in areas other than them being killed by federal law enforcement.
That's true.
I mean, and I'm not saying that the state should murder people. Obviously, the state should not murder people. And you should not be taking out people's families trying to get them. But it should be noted that when we see Joe Biden defending, and let's not pretend he's doing anything else because he is. When you see Joe Biden defending Israel taking out whole families to get one guy and calling the families human shields, it's because Joe Biden supported the feds taking out Randy Weaver's family at Ruby Ridge. He's just sorry they didn't get Randy Weaver too. And I am not saying that. And so you have to understand, he believes that federal law enforcement should have these kinds of powers.
Oh, yeah, he's definitely a law and order guy. I mean, he bragged about it for years. I increased the death penalty like 61 counts back in 1994 when his crime bill went through. And the whole reason why the crime bill went through is because Clinton lost that one election in Arkansas where he showed somewhat of a heart and didn't kill somebody, and then he went on and to kill Randy Rector, because that guy...
there were several. I can't remember the guy's name who was the big deal that everybody got so mad about. I do remember that he was developmentally disabled,
right.
And that there were certain...
It was Rector, something.
I thought it was just somebody else before Rector, whose name I can't remember, but maybe you're right, and it was Randy Rector.
And he was doing that was when he was down in the polls. It's like 1992. It's New Hampshire. He's not doing so well. He goes to that execution and makes sure they kill this guy who literally tells the guards, "Save my pie. I'll be back after this."
Yeah. But he doesn't understand what's happening to him. Yeah.
Right. And he becomes a hero on the left because he's hard on crime. He and Gore take that whole shtick all the way to 2000.
And before Gore became the environmental guy, he was the guy whose wife, now ex-wife, but he was the guy whose wife wanted to ban porn. He was the guy whose wife wanted to get sex off television. He was the guy who wanted to cut entitlements.
Oh yeah, the PMRC. We all know he used the wives because that made it look a lot nicer for everyone. It's like, oh, these wives that just sit home, but of course they're all politically connected and they all have a political. Agenda.
I mean, there are so many jokes about Al Gore getting divorced from his anti-sex crusading ex-wife that I can't make them all, but he was very right. People forget how right-wing Al Gore was.
Yeah, well, that's because he rehabilitated himself quite successfully with the help of another basic. The filmmaker, what's his name? Guggenheim.
Yeah,
who did Where's Superman and climate change, right? The climate change film for him. Is also a right winger, basically.
Waiting for Superman, and Waiting for Superman is an anti-union movie. Fundamentally, the thing you have to remember, it's an anti-union movie.
It's an anti-teacher movie, basically.
It's fundamentally anti-labor. It blames teachers for everything.
Mm-hmm.
Oh shit! I remember the.
It's tremendously anti-union.
Yeah, the environment movie. I definitely remember.
So,
But
Oh yeah, well, I mean the beauty of that, right? I mean, here's a guy telling him
an inconvenient truth.
an inconvenient truth, telling you about saving the environment, right? Meanwhile, he's divesting his corporation into all kinds of oil money from Saudi Arabia, and then he sells it for hundreds and hundreds of millions. And now
These are the contradictions of liberal democracy in America.
yeah.
And it's also the reason why we have
And the liberal outweighs the democracy, and people forget that liberalism itself is a fundamentally elitist and class-oriented idea that says the people who can afford to help society should do so.
Yeah.
Right. But I mean, but in a strange way, it all kind of circles back into these guys at the border because they feel that they're the vanguard of that liberal, push, even though it's a highly conservative idea of liberalism, right? They want all this freedom, just not for, people of color.
Well, what freedom do they want? This is the thing that seems so strange. I have ideas. There are hypotheses that jump to my mind, but I want to ask the question: when the right winger says freedom, you're taking away my freedom. What is the freedom that they're talking about?
I think I can answer that.
Go for it.
I think that when you have a state like ours that was built on white male cishet supremacy, and you start introducing other marginalized groups into the conversation, and they start asking for respect and equality. Well, if one group has all of the power, they're going to have to give some of that up to the other group to maintain equality, right? So that's why you're taking my freedom away, you're taking my privilege away, is what I hear when somebody says that. Because you if you are a white man, a white cishet man in this country, you have an innate privilege, and it's not something you have. It's not a quality of your personality. It's not you hating on somebody else or whatnot. It is the way that society views you and expects you to interact in the social.
Well, it's simpler than that. It's simpler than that, because people are always, well, what's this white privilege you're always talking about? I don't have any white privilege. Well, I can say that as a tall, white, masculine-looking, cishet presenting man, that I have very different conversations with the cops than many of my comrades do if my wife and I are pulled over.
Absolutely.
I don't get treated the same way that people who don't look like me get treated.
Absolutely. And that's not something
that's something I'm aware of.
That's not something that you have active control over, even. That's something
but
that
it's still true.
Assigns to you. Policemen come up to you and say, up here. They don't come up to you and that, like, they would look at me and they would say, oh, you're a little girl that needs protection. Oh, you're a little rich girl who I can take some money from to make my quota this month.
Oh, you're somebody, or hey, because I've been noticing in the news how many how many stories there are out there, if you look hard enough, about people being arrested for fairly heinous sexual assaults. And have you noticed how many of them are cops?
Yeah. I'm glad that the people are
there was one just recently that was absolutely terrifying. Trigger warning for anybody listening. This is absolutely heinous sexual assault. Horrible. Multiple trigger warnings. I never give trigger warnings. I'm giving trigger warnings about this. That's how bad it is.
Epic.
Beat and raped an 18-month-old.
Wow!
And this is a cop.
You trigger warning that I wasn't even prepared. Wow. Holy.
See, this is what I'm saying, and I don't ever give trigger warnings, so I wanted to put all that out there before I said this.
I'm glad you did. That is fucked up.
Yes. Yes, it is. And the picture they chose of this guy, oh my gosh. The picture that was chosen of him for the news has him sitting here with this goofy smile on his face, looking like this big nerd.
Wow.
And it's just like, wow.
So
what the? I don't even have words to talk about that.
I know.
It's the sort of thing where we talk about how we're against capital punishment, and then there's something like this, and it's like, well, I'm having to revisit that for a moment. And no, not really, but...
So here's the thing. Like, I think this could help make a distinction. There are two factors going on in a case like that, right? I mean, aside from the fact that this person is probably very mentally ill, okay?
So I want to stop there, because I think it is unfair to actual mentally ill people whom I know to talk about somebody doing something like that being mentally ill. That's stigmatizing in a way that I don't want to.
Okay.
I don't want to put on anyone. Now, that person has something deeply and heinously wrong with them.
Okay, we'll say that then. Deeply and
I'm sorry. I don't mean, I usually don't tone police either, but I mean, let's not characterize that as something people do because they're mentally ill.
You're totally right.
Not
is a very large umbrella term. So it encompasses anything from like mild depression to that. So absolutely. I apologize.
And also, I just want to say, people also don't do this stuff because they're on drugs. Anybody who does this stuff when they're drunk or on drugs is someone whose inhibitions have been reduced and making them more likely to do what they wanted to do anyway. And it's important to understand this about alcohol and other drugs. People don't just become violent because they're under the influence.
That's right.
Being under the influence makes them more themselves, and they're violent people.
Absolutely. And a lot of people who need medication and don't have it or don't have access to it use drugs and alcohol
to self-medicate because that's what they have.
Right. And as somebody on drugs, I can absolutely co-sign all of that.
Sorry, I just had to get that out there too. But wait, it's just horrible.
Wait, let me make my point though about privilege. Because this is a distinction that I like to try to define as much as I can, because it's so confused. It's such a confused topic, especially among the white community, honestly. So in an instance where you have somebody who has white privilege and is using it to commit, or has privilege in many ways, I mean, especially considering they were a cop, and is using it to harm someone else, right? So that is something that the society has given this person privilege through their whole life. And this is how they are reacting to that privilege. So
it's connection to something I got wrong, by the way, folks.
The quality of this person, instead of it being, it's really more how society has trained him to interact with people and has trained his expectations of what you can get away with. So I want to make that distinction because it's important. It's important to know that as just a white person who just exists as a white person is not necessarily like openly racist or whatever. You still have privilege. You still have white privilege. You still have society telling you that you're more important than people of color. But you have a different reaction to it than this other person did, right? So I need people in the white community, I need people in the male community, I need people in the cishet community to understand these things, because nobody is ever saying that every person with white skin is immediately racist. Nobody's ever saying that, okay? And I just want to end that trigger conversation like so badly.
Well, so I'm nervous. So anybody who talks about white people as if there's really some homogeneous group that called white is someone who's racist, and I don't trust them anyway. But that's another argument for another time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I use these terms loosely.
I know.
And because there is white privilege in this country, regardless of the origins of it, it exists. We believe
Yes.
it exists, so we might as well refer to it.
Well, I mean, the police enforce it whether you want to believe in it or not, and it comes in the different outcomes of different people's interactions with cops.
Yeah, and everybody, and employers, and society at large. I mean, absolutely. Did we want to talk about the Palestine stuff, or?
Well, so I mean, Palestine relates to all this fake borders and unofficial paramilitary militias in lots of ways, right?
Yeah,
Sure.
Absolutely. What was the thing I showed you though? Oh, about
So
Passover.
you were showing me the thing about Passover where something. Oh, are they going to actually mention genocide? Oh no, this is more pro-Israel propaganda.
Oh my God! So literally, like, it just the way that. So it's okay. So it's an article from NPR, and they're basically saying on this day, on this Passover, it means more because there are
because of October 7th, basically.
Because of October 7th. And the way that they phrased it, the headline, it made it sound like it was sympathetic to Gazans. But then when you read it, it's immediately sympathetic to Israel.
They try as the article goes on near the end to start talking about peace and loving Palestinians and Israelis and all this stuff.
Oh, God. I just got to say this, and we don't have to belabor the point, but I said it yesterday, and I'm going to fucking say it forever. Like Passover remembers a time in which a Jew led all of the other Jews away from oppression, slavery, and genocide. Okay? That's what we should be doing with our Passover. But want to tell me that this Passover is supposed to remember the hostages, the 4 people who are being treated very, very nicely by Palestinians, whereas we're killing 35,000 at least. I'm
going to put on my biblical critic hat. So Passover celebrates the escape from slavery and genocide.
Well, yeah,
to a trip to a promised land.
Technically, they inflicted a genocide
where they would then inflict slavery and genocide on, according to their religious and historical tradition, would inflict slavery and genocide upon the people who already lived there. Cool. Now,
so
it's important to understand this sort of dichotomy and these biblical contradictions when you're talking about people who are fighting over this biblical promised land today.
Mm-hmm.
Now, so this means that anybody who is weaponizing Passover in service to Israel is basically remembering that Moses was endorsing a genocide down the road and saying, this is our culture and we're leaning into it because, we're Israel. We are the Jewish nation, which is a very strong nationalist statement. It's very similar to America talking about the president being the leader of the free world.
Mm-hmm. Our God is a vengeful God.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's no different than the Christian nationalists' view.
Well, so in fact, there is a great deal of overlap. The Christian nationalists are mostly Christian Zionists who love the idea of a strong Israel to bring about the necessary steps for their millennial fantasies of Armageddon and destruction and devastation and rapture.
I just hope Kirk Cameron stars in that movie again. I need a little more Kirk Cameron in my rapture.
So, see, when I think about when I think about the second coming and try to think about it from a serious religious perspective, my mind always turns to the gentleman who said, I know the day the Lord will return, and it will be. And he published that date to great acclaim and was hailed as a prophet. And then the date came and the Lord had not returned. And he said, well, actually, I meant. And he kept doing this for several years until almost everyone who thought he was a prophet abandoned him. And the American Bible Society, the organization that he had headed, became this tiny, tiny little fringe publishing house. And the only people who still believed him started a church called that we now know as the Jehovah's Witnesses.
Oh, Lord.
That's true. My personal favorite, though.
But he got away with changing this date like 5 times, and a large membership of the American Christian community went along with the date changes and continued to hail him as a prophet, despite the fact that his prophecy had still failed to come true in very specific terms. It wasn't until like 6 or 7 that he was finally abandoned by the majority of his followers.
Wow.
Well,
hey, do you mind if I just put a bow on what I was saying before?
Please.
What space I was referring to yesterday was a fundraiser for 6 Palestinian families that are trying to escape the genocide in Gaza. They are, I have reposted their links on my page. If anybody is interested, please go check that out. And I'll do another commercial at the end of it for that also, because these are 6 families. They're vetted. They are absolutely in need, and we really need to help them out. So thanks.
Oh,
thank you.
Wonderful.
Yeah. But I do want to hear about Pat Robertson.
Pat Robertson. He used to always every like New Year's he'd come out with this big proclamation that he supposedly spoke with God. I swear to God, like every year, one year in the 80s, it was nuclear war was going to be next month or something, and never happened. It was just some crazy stuff. But, you know, it all goes in hand with that Christian nationalism that Chris was talking about.
The American Bible Society is now Watchtower Press.
Okay, yes, you're right, Jehovah's Witness. I know, because my ex was he was swept into being a Jehovah's Witness by his mother. He never really believed it, but
I gotta say, there's really no perks to being a Jehovah's Witness as far as I can see.
No,
gotta give up your birthday, all the good holidays.
Well,
yeah,
the benefits,
and you got to pay for the privilege.
The primary benefit of any religious organization is the establishment of a new hierarchy.
That's true.
Now, you can say whatever you want about religious belief, about spirituality, about theism versus atheism versus agnosticism. I am open to your ideas. Despite having very specific beliefs of my own, I am a free thinker who is willing to entertain everything that somebody else might have to say on the subject. But we're talking about, when we're talking about these religious beliefs being organized into a system of rules that people are supposed to obey, and some sort of clergy is supposed to enforce, we're talking about the creation of a new hierarchy in which the people who make it to the top of this new hierarchy will have power that they likely did not have before.
Absolutely. And you can definitely see that through the history of the church and the battle between church and state, right? In Europe. It's a big thing. I mean, essentially, like just taking England, like medieval England as an example, the church owned land. The church owned land. The church had vassals. The church essentially had their own mirror feudal system, and they were constantly battling with the nobles.
In France and Spain, where there was no real division between church and state, where the kings appointed the bishops and in theory took their crowns from the Pope, even though this did not happen in any way that was direct and that made the king subject to the Pope in any way the king would admit to. But in the theory of universalism that goes into what the Catholic Church preached. The kings were subject to the church. The bishops were subject to the kings, but the Pope was the final say. And so if it came down to the king versus the Pope, the bishop should listen to the Pope. But the king was still above the bishop in the overall chain of command, and all this complex stuff in the Catholic Church. This is a statement of hierarchy and a legitimization of authority. And the only reason that the king participated in even the limited way that he did was because then the authority of the church legitimized him in the eyes of believers. And this refusal to separate the church from the state in France and Spain brought out the worst in both the church and the state.
Yep.
And you see these wars of religion where the Catholic League attempts to assert its power over the state to the point where ultimately even the king who's on their side is overthrown by a radical Catholic revolt and teams with his own heir in rebellion against him to try to take his throne back. And it's just hilarious in a really, terrible way.
Not to be a Christian nationalist, though, and you happen to be with the Catholics like that. C.J.
Well,
Ingalls,
a lot of this modern Nazism starts in this ultra-Catholicism of the French Revolutionary Wars, where there was a Council of 14 who were making these junta-like decisions about the government of Paris while supporting the Catholic League, and under the rules of their day, the rules of their Catholic Church. This junta was supporting the Catholic League in their illegal and sacrilegious war against the crown in the language of the Catholic Church. And so it's just hilarious because the king was Catholic. Henry III was at war against his Protestant heir at the time, trying to force his Protestant heir to be Catholic. And the Catholic League threw him out of Paris and tried to take over the country.
That's true, but I was going for the more modern day and how these Christian nationalists are.
Yes, but these were Christian nationalists who were talking about him not being Catholic enough to be the king of France.
I know. I was just going to tie that into the fact that it's interesting that they're always part of these libertarian groups now.
Yes.
Who also, ironically, are also part of the same groups that form militias in Idaho.
Because who were the Catholic League? They were the very rich nobles with lots of land who were closer to Spain than they were to France, and they didn't really want to pay taxes to the king of France.
And that's basically
libertarians.
Right. No one wants to pay taxes.
I mean, the Anglo-Saxon notion of individual rights that comes down to us today in liberal democracy is not a notion of individual rights for everyone equally. It's a notion of individual rights for aristocrats and the freedoms that gentlemen have when confronted by royal power. And so you have to remember again that liberalism is for gentlemen because only gentlemen can afford to be liberal.
Does that translate to libertarianism too?
Classical liberalism was very much libertarian in its thinking. This is why modern libertarians frequently go in disguise as classical liberals.
That is their code word for it.
Okay.
When you hear somebody like what's his name, that idiot from that used to be on TYT. Oh, who's always, I'm a classical liberal. Dave Rubin, that's him.
Okay.
See, that idiot who used to be on TYT covers like 4 or 5 people, and I have to go ahead and, does he mean Jimmy Dore? No.
Well, definitely.
Does he mean Mike? I can't even remember Mike's last name now.
Or Shore?
No. Mike,
dunk on Jimmy Dore, that clip I sent you later.
The annoying guy who got beat up by Maxine Waters.
Michael Shore.
Not Michael Shore. I wish I could remember his name.
Oh,
right.
Tracy.
Yes, Michael Tracy. Thank you. He's from TYT.
I forgot he was there. He was one of their first rejects.
Yes. He was Dave Rubin, Jimmy Dore, Michael Tracy. Those are just those. That's three right there. That stupid guy who used to be on TYT.
Yeah, but Dave Rubin's always using that I'm a classical liberal.
Yes, this is true.
And then all he says is that I just don't want to pay taxes and I don't like public schools.
And there's the whole racial component to that. In all of the thing that Tim Pool, who also used to be a progressive Democrat, allegedly, he started out as a Bernie guy, as someone supporting Bernie.
I don't know what's under the beanie. Is there hair under the beanie? That's all I want to know.
No, but the whole thing. But all who was the other guy? H.A. Goodman.
Maybe
I don't remember. He's even smaller and matters less. What's her name? Birch Gold. Kim
Iverson.
Kim Iverson. Yes, thank you. Kim Iverson. All these people who claim to be progressive at one point in their career and are now extreme right wingers, even though some of them, like Kim Iverson, are still trying to pretend to be progressive on in some ways.
Is she trying to pretend she's progressive?
She does. She still tries to talk about economics and socialism and all this, and it's so pathetic because you supported the worst people on the worst issues, and you want to say you're progressive about the economy. It's like, well, if you want to exclude all the most marginalized people who need the most help from your progressive vision for the economy, what's so progressive about your vision for the economy? Now you're just helping middle-class white people.
Yeah, you already got socialism for the rich. Like, please.
Wasn't the big reason why she got fired from The Hill was because she went all crazy on the COVID epidemic and kept?
I don't know if she got fired from. I don't know if she was ever technically hired.
She was a co-host. Supposedly.
Oh, she was a co-host on Rising. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know. I have not followed enough of the Rising drama.
But her whole thing was that she had this weird, like, Fauci conspiracy she wanted to spew, and they just didn't.
Well, she was big into the COVID denial. She was one of the people who Birch Gold had put on their page with the worst of the right wingers, all of whom were spouting COVID denial.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was Jimmy Dore's line too. I remember.
Yeah, but he didn't make the John Birch Society's Birch Gold Investment sponsored talking head page.
I guess he didn't.
Jackson Hinkle did at one point, and Kim Iverson, to the best of my knowledge, is still there.
I think Hinkle would. I think Hinkle would pretty much endorse anything for the.
The John Birch Society, the John Birch Society's Gold Fund endorsed him.
I know, that's what I'm saying.
It's not Hinkle. It's not just that Hinkle endorsed them; they endorsed him. Now he's disappeared from that page since, so maybe he went too far. Even maybe the John Birch Society doesn't like him actually going to Iran.
No, they've had a dream of bombing Iran since like '78. Those first student protests, and they were the ones going, we got to take them down.
Yeah, the John Birch Society still thinks Iranians are communists. Which is hilarious. That's the one thing that the one thing that tankies and the John Birch Society agree on, that Iranians are communists.
That couldn't be any further from the truth.
I know. Ask the Iranian communists.
That's right.
The Iranian Communist Party said some very interesting things about the government of Iran during the women's rights protests, and a lot of these American communists on Twitter are just, Iran is a revolutionary country, blah, blah, blah. They're anti-colonial, blah, blah, blah. Okay. And what do the Iranian communists say about it? Well, the Iranian communists are a CIA front. Why? Well, they don't support the revolutionary government of Iran. Well, why don't they? Because the revolutionary government of Iran illegalized their party and tried to arrest them all.
Weird.
Why did they do that? Because they called for a communist revolution. Why did they do that? Because the government of Iran is clerical and capitalist. Okay, so how is it revolutionary?
Right.
It was revolutionary when they.
Well,
kicked
that
out
was the whole
old-
thing. Is
when they
there's
kicked
this
out the old
moment.
guy.
There was this moment where it could have been revolutionary, and this is the moment where some Iranians who are communists would talk about the revolution being betrayed, and where you can't overestimate the importance of influence with the people on the ground, or influence with the people who ultimately have to decide whether to bomb your country based on your decisions. So there was a moment where the Iranian government could have been a coalition of progressive parties in the legislature led by Tudeh, which was the Iranian Communist Party of the time, following a popular front sort of liberal government ideal. And this was something that made the West very nervous. And there was a discussion that, well, there is a radically Islamic character to many of the boots on the ground. Yes, they want to see economic change, but they're also good Muslims who see an Islamic state as something that will fulfill their hopes for ordinary people. And so that they'll put a religious leader in charge if they have the opportunity. And let me tell you about this guy I met in Paris named Khomeini.
Uh-huh.
And Jimmy Carter heard Khomeini described as saintly. And Jimmy Carter is a good Christian man who has very specific images in his mind about what saintly means. And Jimmy Carter makes a decision based on somebody swearing that the Ayatollah Khomeini is saintly to say, hey, we will not immediately condemn a government if this guy takes charge, thereby basically inviting the revolutionaries to put Khomeini in charge, which is what ultimately happened.
Well, that and the fact that they took over once the military got involved, there was
when the military got involved and declared for Khomeini, that makes a big difference. But then you have to remember too that the military was looking to protect, which was greatly privileged and powerful because of its relationship with the United States before the revolution. The military was trying to protect its own privilege and power and be able to still deal on the side with the Israelis.
Yeah, they were.
And then we have Iran-Contra, which led to the best Denzel Washington movie ever made. So that was good.
Which one's that?
The Mighty Quinn.
Oh, the Mighty
which
Quinn.
is all about Iran-Contra. The crime being covered up in the Mighty Quinn is that's where the drugs are being shipped to be sold. That's where the drugs are being shipped through, and the money is coming back from.
Okay.
I've never seen that one.
Everybody needs to watch the Mighty Quinn, if only to hear Cheryl Lee Ralph sing a completely redone version of the song that's all about the events of the movie.
Okay.
Because she really sings it well. And the scene in the movie where she sings it to make fun of Denzel Washington, but also at the same time sort of say, hey, you're not so bad after all, because she's his ex-wife who doesn't like him very much. And so this is a warming up. She's just so hot singing that song. It's just, everybody has to see it at least once because of that. But seriously, it's Denzel Washington's best movie. It may be the least ethically offensive cop movie ever made, because ultimately it's about a black cop in a colonized portion of the world answerable to America, who is in trouble because he is digging into the cover-up, trying to put this political crime meant to cover up drug smuggling and gun smuggling on the shoulders of the local black pothead and political activist.
Yeah, it's always the Rastafarians.
But this movie is all about the black police chief of this colonized nation quietly destroying the colonial narrative. Cool. And it's like the best Denzel movie, because on top of all that, it's a good action movie and it's genuinely funny, and it's got Robert Townsend as the Rasta who they're trying to pin the crime on in what is genuinely one of his best roles ever.
Okay.
And so it's just a great movie, and I cannot say it strongly enough. I cannot say it strongly enough that everybody should watch The Mighty Quinn. And I'm not even a huge Denzel fan.
Cool.
It's hard to be a huge Denzel fan.
There are people who are. There are people who are huge Denzel. My wife is a huge Denzel.
Once you know something about him, you're like, that guy really is a schmuck.
I don't know anything about him, but I know
he's very anti-LGBTQB. He's like,
I did not know that.
He's like homophobic. He's homophobic in like the extreme.
I did not know that.
Oh yeah, it was amazing that they got him to do that movie he had with Tom Hanks.
Oh, Philadelphia,
because they were going to have a kiss scene in it, right? Where Hanks was going to kiss him on the lips, and he just blew up and went ballistic.
Ooh.
Yeah.
I either did not know that or did not remember that. That's interesting to know.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, I mean, the homophobia as the lawyer was not really him acting. That's really him.
Oh, okay.
Great.
No method required. Just be yourself.
Well, a lot of what people, you have to remember that what's his name? Why can't I remember his name right now? Marlon Brando. Yeah. Marlon Brando was one of the students of Lee Strasberg and was considered a great, great, great method actor. But 99%, how much of Marlon Brando's so-called method acting was just that he was an asshole?
He was drawing from reality, Chris.
I mean, when you consider that there's this extremely realistic sex scene in one of his famous movies that is him actually raping his co-star on camera. And the director decided to leave it in.
Last Tango in Paris.
Yep.
What is it? What's the
movie?
It's
called The Last Tango in Paris, 1972. Bernardo Bertolucci.
Oh, really? Okay. I
and the director was trying to get them to make the sex scene more believable, and Marlon Brando was just like, "Oh, fuck it," and just rapes her in front of the camera. And the director is such a big asshole, he leaves it in.
Wow, that's disgusting.
It is.
It's more than you think it does.
It's very disgusting.
Yeah.
But it's also important to understand that this is considered a great movie for which there was Brando was nominated for an Oscar.
Wow. Here's a reward.
Everyone got an Oscar
on camera. Holy fuck! Isn't that just the patriarchy for you?
But this is Brando's method acting, and so this is the question: how much of Brando's method acting was just the fact that he was an asshole?
Well, it's very that rings similar to a lot of like what people are saying nowadays about like the acting methods that they teach you in school, because they're very abusive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
very abusive. So it sort of lends, it lends itself to people who are interested in abusing others, who are self-centered, and again, interested in exploring dark emotions constantly.
Well, so during the height of the Me Too movement, there were specific actresses of a specific era, that era being the 70s, who had deliberately gone out of their way to be typecast as bad sexually liberated women. These actresses were people like Helen Mirren and Catherine Deneuve, British and European mostly, who had very strong ideas about how women should be able to act if they pleased. And these strong ideas mostly had to do with women being able to be the same kind of abusive assholes and irresponsible pricks as men, rather than actual freedom from abuse.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's an unfortunate.
And it was women from this "we're bad girls" culture of the 70s who would speak up at Me Too and say, these people complaining about sexual harassment are going to ruin it for those of us who like sex.
Well, for those of us who are using sex to get somewhere, yeah.
Well, and and this raises the whole other thing where, okay, so how many people are now defending sexual harassment because part of their liking sex was exploiting the sexual harassment system for their own benefit?
Yeah, and you could definitely make that argument today too.
Well, you can see that there are women who come out against other women in ways that clearly benefit them.
Yeah.
Lisa Bloom offering to represent Weinstein to smear his accusers at the same time as allegedly being a vocal advocate for Me Too on MSNBC.
Right. Yeah. It's disgusting. And
that sort of thing. And I don't like to defend bad positions by otherwise good people. It's something I try to avoid.
Okay.
But it's important to remember that when some socialist outlets refer to Me Too in a certain way, they are very much remembering Lisa Bloom on MSNBC talking out both sides of her mouth while smearing Harvey Weinstein's accusers.
So to clarify, you're saying that those who are saying that
there are some people on the left, specifically the World Socialist website, who have taken a Me Too was a political op by the Democrats line that people choose to take as saying sexual harassment doesn't happen, when in actuality they are saying Me Too was politically exploited by the Democrats, and you can see this when you notice how the Democrats started treating people who were no longer convenient to their narrative about Me Too.
Sure.
The best example being the Democratic Party's decision to punish Christian Gillibrand for pushing Al Franken to resign. Because whether you like Kristen Gillibrand or not, it's important to remember that she stood up for her feminist principles there and was punished for doing so, and clearly learned her lesson when she refused to stand up for her feminist principles when Joe Biden was the nominee.
It was about the only time she stood up for anything.
Well, that was the whole thing. Her political moment in the sun had been when she again stood up for strong feminist principles in advocating aggressively for the victims in the Army harassment and rape scandals.
You know what you said about, so there is absolutely a line that is dangerously echoed among the left, that the Me Too movement is dead, that it's a scam, that basically, what everything that you're saying, that it was, co-opted by the Democrats and everything. But listen, even if it was co-opted by the Democrats, which arguably you could absolutely say that it was, it doesn't make the reality different.
Well, but that's the whole thing. Abuse is an important issue, and abuse needs to be an important issue.
It's not just an important issue; it's a disgustingly common issue.
Yes, well, that's why it's important. Let's go ahead and the reason that abuse is a more important issue than the theory of whether or not an elite criminal defendant is innocent before proven guilty, ignores the fact that the point of an accusation of abuse is not about a criminal conviction. An accusation of abuse is about a person saying, this person did this to me, so that other people know that that person is dangerous.
And so let's talk about why exactly that is, because there never is a conviction, right?
Yes.
Ever.
There almost never is. When there is, there's always some other reason for it.
Let me finish, Chris. So our biggest hope for justice in this lifetime is to be able to come out and say it and not have our lives destroyed by it. Because anybody who comes out and it admits Me Too, their lives are destroyed. It's not the rapists' lives that are destroyed. It's the people who come out and say Me Too, and their lives are always destroyed because nobody believes them, because everybody, even the people who do believe them are saying these people are too politically controversial to offer a job to.
Chris,
right?
Well, at the same time, Chris Cuomo and Bill O'Reilly are able to do a podcast together on Twitter and get millions of views and talk about how they're both being mistreated by the mainstream media, of which they're absolutely still members, even if they're not respected. They may be shunned members, but they're still members.
Absolutely.
Well, the guy from Good Morning America who had the button on his desk that where you could lock the door is now shopping himself around again to get back on the air.
They're all coming back.
Don Lemon was going to launch his own show on. Well, he's still doing his show on Twitter and other places, but he was going to get all this support from Elon Musk that stopped as soon as he interviewed Elon Musk. And, to his credit, I'm not a big Don Lemon fan, but he actually gave a serious quality journalistic interview to Elon Musk that revealed how unable to explain many of his own beliefs and positions Musk is, which is, of course, why Musk dropped any support for his show.
You mean to tell me he didn't do a Matt Taibbi and just...
He totally did not, which is absolutely what I thought would happen. That's obviously your whole reason for doing a show on Twitter. If you're having Elon Musk on as your first guest, you're going to suck up to Elon Musk because that's the whole point. But apparently, no, not Don Lemon. And I feel like I'm praising Don Lemon, and that's not my intention. But at the same time, he decided he was going to give Elon Musk a real interview on his own platform.
Well, this is an interesting conversation. Let's talk about that for a second. Let's note,
Elon Musk is the free speech guy. So what happens when Don Lemon exerts his free speech?
Well, so like the idea of canceling somebody because they have, a sexual assault allegation against them, right, is essentially why people feel the need to cancel the Me Too movement.
Yes.
And I don't think that these two things should be in conflict. I think that, first of all, let me say that if the Me Too movement is dead, it's because the left is killing it by pronouncing it dead. Let me first of all say that, because the Me Too movement is not Time's Up. The Me Too movement is not the Democrats. The Me Too movement are women on the fucking ground telling the truth to each other. And we're still doing that every day, whether or not the media covers it. So there is that. But also, I will also say that really quick about wokeness and ID politics, because again, these are things that the left is pronouncing dead and therefore killing. And these are not things that should be killed because they are based on real activist work. They are based on real scholarly academics. They, just because it was co-opted by the mainstream, that means that we were making headway. That doesn't mean we should stop. That doesn't mean we should let it be co-opted. So I just wanted to make that point.
No, and that's a good point, and that's why I don't agree with the World Socialist website's positions on this.
Yeah.
At the same time, I there's a lot of misrepresentation about positions on the World Socialist website about them being things that they're not. One of the best examples that I can think of is they ran an editorial once that said that a specific anti-union decision ultimately didn't matter because the unions were not willing to break the laws that were already on the books. So why were they going to challenge any? Why were they going to go beyond what they were already doing before the precedent? And basically, it was very scathing criticism of union leadership.
Okay.
And this has been taken as an anti-union statement in support of the decision ever since by specific critics of the World Socialist website. But at the same time, they have positions that are not good, even if they're not as bad as people try to make them out to be.
Mm-hmm.
And
I don't know. I think their positions on Me Too are pretty terrible.
I'm not saying they're not. I'm not saying they're good.
And
they're
as
terrible.
someone who has really angered
There is a conflation. There is a conflation of this right that a criminal defendant has in a courtroom,
mm-hmm.
with a democratic right against being accused without someone being able to prove it in court, and that's not a real right.
I know, but I was saying, but as someone who's brought up the problem with them,
but that's what their argument comes down to. Their genuine belief that there's this democratic right to not be accused if people can't prove it in court.
That's part of it. It's also some weird, they don't like to say it, but the writers seem to have some strange male privilege thing going on, that they see themselves as being part of the same club as the other white guys that are.
Let me talk about Trotskyism for a moment, because there's an important moment in the history of Trotskyism that cannot be forgotten and is all too often not talked about. The man who would eventually go on to write all sorts of interesting stuff about colonialism, C.L.R. James, was sat down with Leon Trotsky, and they had this talk about the black community and black socialists and the black left in America, and how black the Communist Party was. And Leon Trotsky, well, we need to sit down with the black leadership and educate them and lead the black population in our struggle for justice. And C.L.R. James, no. You need to educate them and hold them up and support them and let them lead the struggle for justice.
Mm-hmm.
And Trotsky just sort of would not get it and blew C.L.R. James off. And you have to remember that feeling of superiority is what is rubbing you wrong.
But that was Lenin and Trotsky even in Russia. I mean, they
disbanded
all
but I'm just pointing out.
Yeah.
It's that feeling of superiority that we know better and we have to lead for every other group.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that's what you're seeing.
Take up
that's a problem, but that's not a problem that's unique to the World Socialist website.
No, it's not.
And none of the people, none of the groups on the so-called left casting stones at the World Socialist website, because of positions on public health or their attempt to organize workers to ask for more than the UAW is willing to ask for.
Mm-hmm.
None of those people who are angry at them for those positions really care about the things they're saying about the World Socialist website on those other positions.
That's true.
They don't really disagree with it, except as this, oh, look at what they're saying, sort of gotcha. Because if you look at what they're doing, it's not fundamentally, they're fundamentally worse.
I agree. And that's an interesting topic we can tie
into. The World Socialist website had a woman on their presidential ticket in 2020. Now, admittedly, she was the running mate and not the presidential candidate, and they don't have a woman on their presidential ticket this year. But they had a woman on their presidential ticket in 2020, which is more than can be said for the Republicans in 2020.
True. But you also have to wonder about just the fact that they have such a low representation of women writers in general on that website.
Well, and that's a culture. There's a cultural problem there.
Yeah.
There is a cultural problem in Trotskyism generally, and by Trotskyism I include the DSA.
I would.
There is also a problem in the larger political sphere.
Yes.
That is male dominated.
Yes.
I will say that too.
Well, PSL is better. I have lots of complaints about PSL on issues of the pandemic and COVID, which I believe they're ignoring in ways they shouldn't. And some people associated have danced the line with some of the more unsavory people on the right with some of the anti-vax stuff. But at the same time, PSL is very good.
They have a bad history with sexual assault. I want that for the record. Sorry.
Yep. No, PSL has a bad history. So do most left organizations in America, I want to say.
That's true.
PSL's candidates are both women of color. I have to say that PSL's vice presidential candidate grew up in Fontana, California, and I was born in Fontana, California, so I admit that there is a sentimental
bias.
Sentimental bias towards the PSL in that regional sense, because not on a class level too, because Fontana really is a working class town. And as a woman of color, she represents the working class of Fontana, which is primarily brown.
Cool. I really like those women. I love Claudia De La Cruz, and I love everything she has to say.
Karina Garcia, the running mate, is from
Fontana. Karina Garcia also. She's actually, I think, married to the head of PSL. That's what I had heard.
Interesting.
So the reason I bring up the sexual assault issue is because it was dealt poorly with by the larger organization, and that's my only concern with it. I don't, I think they're a newer organization, and for that reason alone, they're going to get a lot of scrutiny. So I want to say that what they're doing with the Palestine movement, and that everything that Claudia De La Cruz is doing to, unite kids on TikTok is fucking amazing. And I completely support that.
I think there's good activism out of PSL. I wish they were better on COVID.
Yeah, same.
And I wish, I love the World Socialist website on COVID and labor, and I wish they were better on some cultural stuff.
Nobody's perfect.
But there's a cultural problem. There's that cultural problem in a lot of Western socialism that has this Leninist, Trotskyist idea. Even Stalin didn't get away with it completely, though Stalin actually listened to Harry Haywood to a great deal in the 1920s, and Harry Haywood was an actual black communist, so that was something. Harry Haywood was the only black American to be on the Communist Party Central Committee in the 1920s. That's a nice fact for history.
Well, that's cool. We're coming up on 2 hours, Chris, and I was hoping that we would still be able to get to the Jimmy Dore clip if possible.
Yes,
sure.
Let's talk about that.
Because I really want to dunk on him.
Okay.
Is this the one about women
Go ahead
dunking?
What's that?
Is this the one about women can't dunk?
Yeah.
Yes.
Let's see if women can indeed dunk.
I have strong feeling about women's sports, and it's not what people expect it, and it's usually not what people expect it to be. So you really have to understand that women's sports exist because of male egos.
Yes, absolutely.
And that
there's no real scientific reasoning behind can't have integrated sports.
It is a historical fact that every time a decision of should women be involved in sports has come up, judges or other officials, not athletes or coaches or journalists, but judges or other officials of the sport have said, no, we don't want women in the sport because we think that could end up reflecting badly on us somehow. They'll say we're dating the winners, and that's why we're voting for them. They'll say that we're giving them good scores because we want to date them. They'll use the fact that women are competing against our integrity, and we can't have that.
Well, you know what it is, really, that because all of that is absolutely true.
Because
but it is also lip service, because in reality, all sports are a capitalist enterprise, right?
Oh, certainly.
So you have to be able to sell women playing sports, and because there is such a stigma against that, it's very hard to sell.
So this was before there was a stigma. So let's talk about how this conversation came up in the specific context of figure skating, because this is one of my favorite topics.
Figure skating is still athletic, and so is dancing, and also
yes,
those
and
things.
Figure skating is divided into men's and women's divisions.
They're both also related to theater, which has a different history too.
Now, if you think about figure skating, and you think about the actual competition that goes into figure skating, and the fact that everyone is ultimately skating against themselves for the judges, there is no direct physical competition. There's absolutely no reason that men and women shouldn't compete against each other.
No.
Under the same rules. Now, with that in mind, a woman named Madge Syers, who was the best skater in England of her time, literally, she beat her husband in the national championships the same year she went to the world championships, to say she was the best figure skater in England at the time. But no, so this is, and I want to repeat that, she beat her husband.
That's awesome.
So, and he was also her coach, and he was one of those men who, like Annie Oakley's husband, after finding a woman who was better than them at the best thing they did, stepped back and made their entire life about that woman's career.
Oh my God. Amazing.
But no, I just want to point that out. That's what now there was an exploitive element about it. These men became wealthy as a result too.
Sure.
But at the same time, they willingly took a step back and made their whole lives about their wives' career.
Yeah, absolutely. You got to applaud that.
So anyway, Madge Syers, she competes in a field of 18 people in which everyone knew who the winner was going to be. The man who won the gold medal was a man named Ulrich Saukow. I don't know if you follow figure skating or not, but there is a jump in figure skating called the Saukow.
Yes.
Ulrich Saukow is the man the Saukow is named after.
Wow.
Everyone knew he was going to get the gold medal. Madge Syers won the silver medal, so that means out of the other 17 people, she was the best. And that was the real competition because everyone knew who was going to win the gold. So, out of all the other 17 best figure skaters in the world, after the guy the jump central to the sport is named after, Madge Syers was the best in the world. That's before anything else happened, right?
Yes, it is.
Mm-hmm.
At the awards ceremony, Ulrich Saukow goes through the thing, he's given his gold medal. Madge Syers goes through the thing, she's given her silver medal. Ulrich, the third guy, goes through his thing, he's given his bronze medal. Ulrich Saukow, before the press can talk to anybody, comes up, gives his gold medal to Madge Syers, and says she is the best figure skater in the world.
Damn.
Now, this can be attributed, for anyone who wants to say, hey, Ulrich Saukow is the best in the world. This can be attributed as Ulrich Saukow saying, hey, she beat all the other people in a situation where everyone knew I was going to win. She's the next big thing after me. When I retire, she's the best in the world.
Mm-hmm.
You can look at it that way. The judges chose to look at it as the best figure skater in the world is casting aspersions on our decision.
Oh, for God's sake.
This makes us look bad.
Oh, my.
And they made a decision based on the fact that Ulrich Saukow had made them look bad in their eyes. not to let women compete in future world championships because, and they literally listed all these reasons, of all the reasons women competing could make male judges look bad.
Wow. Holy shit, man.
So when I say that men did this very selfishly, not athletes, not journalists, not coaches, but officials and judges of sports who are worried about their power, making sexist decisions for these very selfish reasons so that they wouldn't look bad. This is literally what I'm talking about. Them choosing to take something good and sportsmanlike that athletes are supposed to do as a personal affront to them.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And based on this personal affront, choose to ban all women from figure skating so that they will never be affronted again. This is the sort of fragility we're talking about here.
Let's see some.
And this is why I love this story, because this lays bare the hypocrisy of anyone claiming that they're trying to defend women by keeping women's sports pure, a women only, a people in this category of woman only ghetto.
Yeah.
Because remember, this is a ghetto that women had to form for themselves when men refused to let them play.
Right.
And let us see that beautiful door footage.
Literally, because it was literally the next year that the first women's championship was founded, specifically so that Madge Sayers could skate. Because Madge Sayers and her husband had won the world doubles championship both years. And Madge Sayers was the only person who won the British championship her whole career, because the British championship stayed both men and women until after she retired.
Crazy.
They weren't willing to insult her while she was alive. The British didn't actually establish a second women's division until after she was dead, out of respect.
Oh. Are we going to play the Jimmy Dore clip?
Yes, we should, if we can find it. Do I have it? Let me look.
I'm sorry.
I think you gave it to me.
Do I think, didn't I?
I have to look, because I almost never play clips of other shows, because I usually don't want the show to be about that. But yeah, that clip is pretty bad. So
I mean, I just thought it'd be funny.
Oh, it is funny.
I just thought we could let it rip because he was dumb.
No, I understand. I just have to go grab it.
It's sad that he blocked me long ago.
He blocked me too. What's funny is he used to follow me. He blocked me. His wife still follows me, and I half suspect his wife's account is really Jimmy watching the people that he's blocked.
Well, supposedly he has a couple of sock accounts that.
Well, I have at least one online conspiracy theorist who follows the trolls, and I don't mean that in a bad way. No offense. Mm-hmm. I don't mean conspiracy theorist in a bad way when I talk about people who follow the trolls. But at least one of the accounts that follows the trolls believes that several fairly well-known voices on the pro-Jimmy Dore troll brigade are actually socks for Jimmy Dore.
Yeah.
Or probably some unpaid intern.
Right.
With his script. You will say yes. At this
well,
time.
But they were speculating actually him.
To watch,
but
buy a ticket to go see a slower.
Pause that. And now let me.
His dulcet tones.
Yeah, well, you know, Jimmy Dore has a face for radio and a voice for silent movies.
Nice. And a wardrobe for grandpas.
You know, people can wear whatever they want. I frequently wear the Hawaiian shirts like Connor is rocking today. I cannot complain.
You guys
about how other people dress. I'm wearing a really basic polo shirt right now over a white t-shirt. I can't question anybody else's fashion sense.
No, I think I feel as a woman that because people question my fashion sense on a daily fucking basis, including when I go to my job and they tell me I can't wear a tank top because my shoulders are showing. So I feel very qualified to go ahead and
tank top because the shoulders are showing.
My
Wow,
shoulders.
You're working in a really puritanical workspace.
No.
Better keep those ankles covered too.
I was working in a pharma lab as a secretary.
Yeah.
This is
Keep
a
those ankles
regular
covered.
thing, I'm telling you. In every office situation, it is unprofessional to show your shoulders.
Your inferior form of basketball where the people playing can't jump.
And that's not a slam at women. Maybe it is, but women can't jump. Why?
Let's try this again because I want people to be able to see the doofus.
He's kind of rocking that Bannon theory that we should have like 4 shirts on at once.
There we go. Here we go, folks.
Why would you want to watch, buy a ticket to go see a slower, inferior form of basketball where the people playing can't jump? And that's not a slam at women. Maybe it is, but women can't jump. Why? Because their center of gravity is different. Men's center of gravity is in their shoulders. Women's center of gravity is in their hips. So their body doesn't lend itself to jumping in basketball. And that's really key to basketball.
Well, they're also not 8 feet tall typically. Although I guess Brittany Griner's pretty tall, right?
It's got to do with the jumping.
Yeah.
The jumping. Spud Webb was 5'5" or whatever. He could dunk because he could jump.
Because his center of gravity is on the top of his head. Because his center of gravity is on the tip of his penis. What the fuck are you talking about?
Obviously, someone here failed Physics 101.
Oh
hard.
My God, yes, or never took a movement class, or a fight class, or any type of taekwondo. Like, oh my God.
What's really funny about this?
Everyone's center of gravity is the same. It is literally the middle of your body. Like, it's not
what's really funny about this is that there is a statistical fact that fewer stars in the WNBA dunk than do in the NBA. That is a statistical fact. And there are biological reasons that women generally have to be taller and built a certain way in order to be able to jump as high as men. Now, all of that aside, women who would agree with the "we don't jump as well as men" position were pointing out in replies to this video that Jimmy doesn't know anything about physiology or why things are what they are. Yeah. And more importantly, jumping doesn't change the fact that Caitlin Clark, who is a woman, became the only person to ever set a record in both scoring and assists in the same season, which is something no man has done.
Mm-hmm.
And has done something that only Larry Bird has done before as far as scoring 2 years in a row.
Yeah.
And the women's basketball Final Four got more people watching it than the men because of Caitlin Clark. She's that big a star. That's what's got Jimmy Dore's knickers in a twist and why he's doing this.
So
that's the subtext for all this, is that Caitlin Clark really is potentially, by statistics, and by the fact that she is competing against people who are supposed to be at her own level, and she is so much better than them. Caitlin Clark is arguably, by the numbers and with strength of competition taken into account, the best person to ever play college basketball in the United States.
Nice.
Now, you can argue why she's not. And if you really want to, you can even make physical arguments for why women's basketball will always be a fundamentally different sport than men's basketball.
Sure.
But that's not the same as saying that women wouldn't be able to necessarily play with men in the NBA.
No. And it's certainly also, again, like he's what my particular angle on this video is the absolute arrogance of the way that he's saying this is not a dunk on women, or maybe it is, I don't know. What? No, you're motherfucking dumping on women.
No. Plus, because no. But
You just said
think about it. He's talking
women's
about
basketball is boring. Am I wrong? Did you just fucking say that?
He's talking about dunking, and he chose the word slam. Now think about that. Do you think that was accidental, or do you think that's scripting from his great comedy?
I think
this is Jimmy Dore's great comedy at work.
I think the great comedy is this total and utter lack of knowing how jumping actually really works.
Oh my God! I mean that is.
I mean, and again, women who agree with his basic premise that women can't jump as well as men are pointing out why he's wrong about the reasons they can't jump as well as men.
I'm glad to hear that, because you're right that that is incorrect. That men's center of gravity is not in their fucking shoulders, you idiot.
No, no. This whole center of gravity thing is just stupid. It has to do with the fact that when you jump, you use a specific set of muscles.
Mm-hmm.
And for sociological reasons, more so than biological determinism, male and female muscles develop differently because men and women are raised differently and are athleticized differently.
Absolutely.
This is where we talk about, theater and dance and such being very close to sports in many ways.
They're very athletic.
Basil Rathbone was an Olympic fencer for the British before he became a bad guy for Hollywood, and he actually taught many of the leads in movies where he was the heavy how to fence for the sword fights in those scenes. And was frequently the stunt director or choreographer for those scenes, uncredited.
That's awesome. That's really cool. But
except uncredited, which means his work was being totally exploited for the gain of the studio.
Yeah, I know. I have 2 points that I like to make. The first being that a lot of the sort of common statistics that you hear in the zeitgeist about women being smaller, women being muscularly developed and stuff, these are all dependent on averages. And it's very important to note that averages do not reflect the majority of people. That if you take an average,
average is not majority. This is correct.
Not represent the majority. It is merely the average, right? It is merely a operation, a mathematical operation.
The average is what happens when you add all the numbers together and divide it by the number of people.
Right. Exactly.
That is simply
possible to have a group of data, right? To have like a list of women's heights and weights, and have the average height and weight match nobody's.
It is important
height and weight.
It is important to understand.
It's important to understand that these averages are not an accurate gauge of women should be able to do physical shit.
Once you are talking about averages, you also have to understand that both men and women athletically are generally well outside of that average.
Absolutely.
They are athletes.
Absolutely.
Because athletes are by definition, the worst athletes are above average compared to the rest of us.
Right.
If they're actually athletes.
Absolutely. And so the same variation among men exists among women.
Exactly.
And therefore, this entire discussion is completely ridiculous and has no science.
But the tallest woman to ever play in the WNBA was very nearly as big as Yao Ming.
Mm-hmm.
And was also Chinese, to blow out of the water the idea that Asian people are all small.
Look at that. Bam. No, seriously. So that's point number 1. Point number 2 is that I specifically hate the fact that, and I'll use Jimmy Dore as a perfect example, that there are people in this world that are able to sort of come out and tell you, completely abuse somebody vocally, and then pretend like, oh, I didn't really mean it. This isn't really what I'm saying. This is a joke. This, you know what I'm saying? His style about about white supremacy, about male supremacy, the way that he deals with it is joking in a way of affirming male supremacy and affirming white supremacy. It is not. I mean, he's saying these things as a disclaimer against what he's actually fucking saying.
You have to understand though.
On women, yeah, but I'm about to dunk on a woman.
But I'm
you
gonna
can't get away with that shit anymore. I'm here to point you the fuck out, Jimmy Dore. You cannot get away with that shit anymore. You.
We'll take it a step further than Jimmy, because I want to project this out. I want people to understand what people are saying. The argument Jimmy is making is the same argument that the quote unquote feminists make when they talk about trans women in women's sports.
You mean
because when Jimmy talks about these physical differences between men and women, what he's really talking about, whether he talks about the center of gravity or something else, what he's really saying is women can't jump, women can't dunk. Women's basketball will never be as good as men's basketball, which means women will never be as good as men. Which now, if you look at that, this is the argument against letting trans women participate in women's sports, that no woman will ever be as good as any biologically assigned male at birth person ever.
Yes. And that not only as good, but weaker than and able to be injured by, right? That's the real kind of
yes, and that's really the thing. Every woman is at risk of injury from every man because of the physical weakness.
Right. And how unbelievably disgustingly stupid that is. I mean, not only does that argument, pre-assume that women are all weaker than men, which is and again, that is a patriarchal assumption.
But it's important to understand it. Now, then remember the crossover between anti-trans people and anti-sex work people. Mm-hmm. And that they both claim to be feminist and both move in the same right-wing circles and both repeat the same anti-feminist rhetoric.
Absolutely. Because they do accept certain things about the patriarchy. They do accept benefit from certain things.
I am looking at the time, and we should wrap up. I apologize. And I just want to ask Connor, do you have any final thoughts before we wrap?
Just that probably not a good idea to go join a militia and patrol the borders, because it makes you a whack job. Sorry, there's no 70% good guy with a gun at the border.
Absolutely.
I agree. Anybody who's on the border with a firearm trying to shoot people sneaking across the border is by definition making a racist decision in the interest of white supremacy.
That's a violently racist decision.
That's true.
It should be criminally violent.
Thank you for joining us today, Connor. I really appreciate it.
No problem. I love being on the show. Gonna have to have you on mine soon, both of you. Talk about something. Don't know what.
Love that. I'm sorry if we were both chatty over you.
Oh, no. It's okay. I just have to do something in a few minutes.
I feel very strongly about this sports issue for a variety of reasons, because I am not a sports person, but I am very interested in the history of how social justice politics and economic politics have overlapped with sports.
Oh, that is interesting.
Walter Johnson was writing communist pro-labor articles in Sporting News in the 1930s.
Oh, cool. Yeah, that would make a great topic for another episode.
Yeah. It would.
But that's my main interest in sports, and just women's sports is a history not of women boldly forming their own leagues so they could play, but women boldly playing against men and being told they couldn't, and then forming their own leagues because they had no other choice.
Wow.
And that's my final thought, because people need to understand that.
Yeah. Well, my final thought is please take a look at the Gazan families that need
Yes.
money. On my page and on Pepper Anna, who goes by Oh Lightworker on Twitter. This was her baby, this was her idea, and we really want to spread the message of these 6 families and try to get them as much money as possible so that they can escape the genocide. So thanks for letting me mention that.
Well, thank you for mentioning it. I really appreciate that, Bess.
Yeah.
And I hope everybody has a great rest of their Sunday and a good week this week. And as always, I'll tweet at you.
Well, thanks,
All
Chris.
right. Thank you.
Thank you guys both.